בשלב המרגש הזה אני מזמינה את האורחת שפתחה את היום עם הקיינות, our special guest from Syracuse University, פרופסור פמלה.
I actually prefer to stand when I lecture, so I will talk from here. I grew up in a very, very kind of poor area, southern Ohio, and part of the Appalachian Mountain foothills. And my high school was the poorest in the poor in the area, and we didn't have good teachers, as it turned out. But I had a good English teacher. So that's how I got into journalism. And I can tell you that through all of my college career, including my doctorate, I never, ever, ever imagined that I would have known Akiba Cohen and that I would be standing here right now. International research did not come to me naturally, as I knew nothing about other nations. So when I had an opportunity to do a study, I talked to Akiba first. We met first in 1988 when he had his famous conference here about television and Eurovision and the connections between film and natural background that was sent to various countries and how they used it, which was quite astonishing because, you know, the Germans were as Germans are, and the English were another way, and the Israelis were another way, and so on. And I was impressed by the American correspondent. What was his name? He covered the Middle East for, he said, 20 years or something. Martin Fletcher. And the thing that it thoroughly embarrassed me as an American was that he had covered the Middle East for 20 years and had never learned Hebrew. He had never learned any Middle Eastern language, and he relied totally on his translators. And that, of course, is one way that news information becomes distorted when the translator tells you one thing and not another, or who, you know, we all spin things our own way. To this day, I do not know why Akiba invited me to that conference. I even asked him this yesterday, and I was very young in my career, and I think I had just gotten tenure at the University of Texas at Austin. No one knew me as far as I knew, and as I said, I had not been doing international research. So I was thoroughly astounded to get this invitation to come to Israel and participate in this effort. And Akiba was a gracious host, and Eddie, a very gracious host. And it was the most incredible time of my life to be here, and also to be put on a bus along with about 15 other, mostly Americans, and driven around most of Israel throughout a week or 10 days, while Akiba was at home working, and we were on this bus. But we got the flavor of Israel in that way that we would never have gotten if we had just gone to 2 or 3 cities and learned something about it. When I had the money to do a large project, my dean said to me, "What will you do to make us famous?" And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I said, have to do an international study, have to take my ideas, which were thought of in the United States and studied in the United States, and see if they hold anything, any water anywhere else in the world. And my assistant, Martin, and I discussed this long and hard, and I said, you know, I need an international scholar to work with me on this, because I was not an international scholar, trust me. And I thought, who would that be? Who would that be? And the first name that popped into my head was Akiva Cohen, because I knew he had been president of ICA. I knew he had made this international conference. I knew that he knew everyone in the world. And it was very important to know everyone in the world, because we had to persuade scholars in 10 countries or so to participate with us. And we had a meeting in Paris, and Gideon was there and was a very important part of it, and gave me a grounding in reality about what international news was about. So Akiba and I started working gradually on this book. And originally we had planned to do many more countries. But we decided, Akiba and I both being quantitative people, that you can either do a lot of countries in one city for a small amount of time, or just do one medium, or you can do 10 countries in 2 cities in each country and study television, radio, and newspapers. And so that was our final decision, to study wide, but also to study deep. And we selected the countries, well, first of all, based on where we knew somebody. I mean, I figured Akiba knew somebody everywhere, but even I knew a few people from conferences. And so we eventually came upon 10 people who are willing to work on this study. And Akiba and I are more alike than any of you can imagine. Eddie said that Akiba and I were like brother and sister arguing over the kitchen table, because we would fight to the death for the last comma. And I remember one time at my house very clearly when he was reading my manuscript, and he said, well, you said the word while here, as in while the world goes on, and I want to say although the world goes on. And I said, no, it's not although. And he said, yes, it is. This is correct. You've got to do this. And I said, no, absolutely not. And if we could get into arguing matches about one word, you can imagine what happened to us when we were trying to work on a whole major project, which eventually took 5 years. I have never in my life met anyone who made me so angry that I would pound the table. I felt like Khrushchev visiting Kennedy's kitchen and using my shoe. I mean, what could you do to get his attention? You know, to say, I am correct, I know I am correct, and pound the table. That was the only thing I could do. And there was more than one time when I actually left the room crying, which is what women do when they get really, really angry, right? So, but we went through it. At one point, I realized that I didn't know what I was doing. And so I said to my assistant, Martin, we have to go to Israel and talk with Akiva, because we're not going to be able to figure this out otherwise. And so I called him and I said, or emailed perhaps, I don't know. And I said, well, spring break is coming up, like in 2 weeks. I said, can you meet with us for a week? Which is very presumptuous on my part, that Akiva would just lay aside a week for me. But it turned out that was also a break, I guess. And he had intended to do other things, but he graciously did give me the week. And when we worked out many details of the study, and with much pounding and a little crying, and it was fine. It was fine, and until I wanted to leave the airport in Tel Aviv, and they said, "Why were you here?" And I said, "I came to work with a scholar at Tel Aviv University." And they said, "Who is that?" And I said, "Professor Akiva." And they said, "Why? Where's your letter of invitation?" I said, "I don't have a letter of invitation." And they said, "What? How could you possibly come to Israel without a letter of invitation?" And I said, "Well, I just decided we needed to come and talk to him about our study." And they looked at me like I was daft. I was totally crazy, which maybe I was. But I finally had to pull out the code book for the content analysis we were doing and show them the code book and all the things written all over it. And that was the only thing that got me back home. Okay.
Don't fall on the table when you say that.
No. It's been a remarkable number of years since 1988, and working on this book for 5 years. Akiba is a very adamant person, but he's also very warm, and he is funny, and he's incredibly smart. And I was recently leafing through our book, News Around the World, for something, and I just started reading. And I thought, oh, how could I have been so presumptuous as to ask this great scholar to do this work with me? And how much I wish that I had listened to him more instead of arguing back.
אני רוצה להודות לכל חברי הפאנל הזה שהשתתפו ותרמו וחלקו וסיפרו ושיתפו. פרופסור גדעון קוץ, דוקטור מרגלית טולדנו, פרופסור עמית שכטר, פרופסור שומייקר. ואני יודעת שיש לכם המון שאלות, אז אני רק רוצה להראות לכם מתנה שהחוג לתקשורת הכין לעקיבא לכל אלה שיש להם שאלות והם רוצים לדעת מקור סמכותי ביותר, מהימן, שאנחנו אוהבים לשלוח את הסטודנטים שלנו אליו. נתן הוא היוצר של היצירת פאר הזאת. יהיה לך, עכשיו תעשה לך גוגל ותבדוק את עצמך בוויקיפדיה. תודה רבה לנתן.